Next, Malik Ducard, a Vice President of Content Partnership at YouTube. James Dunstan, who serves as General Counsel.
If you look at our rule, we list a number of factors for determining whether a site or service is directed to kids, including the subject matter of the site, the visual content, use of animated characters or child-oriented activities or incentives, music or other audio, age of models, celebrities, language, advertising, and any empirical evidence. So those are just some of the factors in the COPPA rule. And so I want to start by throwing open the question, are these the right factors? And regardless of whether they're the right factors or not, should some of them be weighted more heavily than others?
No, I would add that I think my answer covers both questions in a way. The COPPA factors that have been outlined, we really do believe that those are the right factors. But I think that what's really important is that there's balance of the factors between both content, whether it's subject matter or the content of, let's say, a video, and content. So audience and who you're advertising to and what the intent was. And having the right balance is important. We get concerned when one factor is looked at not in an inclusive way, but in an exclusive way. So audience, for example, with audience as the sole factor, we think that gets to a skewed reality. So you can imagine we're in World Series time right now. And if a popular sports game has a large amount of viewership on that, there's going to be a large amount of children who are watching that as well. Does then that make that match, that game, child-directed? And that's an area that we don't think it should go in that direction, but the proper balance is important. The second point I'd like to make is around clarity. So once you have that balance, we think that clarity to creators and to platforms on where the line is drawn between child-directed, mixed audience, general audience, that those lines are a little bit unclear, and there's a need for more guidance. So, as everyone knows, YouTube recently announced product changes that we'll be making in the next few months. When we announced those product changes, there was an overwhelming amount of request for clarity, confusion in the creator-developer landscape around where do I draw the line? Is my content child-directed or not? Or I believe my content is not child-directed, but I don't have enough clarity to really understand how I should be classifying that content. And I know that there's creators in the audience and a lot of creators watching this live stream right now because this is something that meaningfully impacts their lives. Some of the questions that came into my team include, for example, does describing content as family-friendly or kid-safe mean it would be classified as made for kids? If we just want to be clear that the video doesn't include swearing, does showing a child in the video mean it's made for kids? If I use an animated sequence for my cooking show, does that mean it's going to be defined as made for kids? And so on and so forth. So we think that clarity from the FTC and this process, which we're excited about, is helpful.
So it's interesting, and people should please put up their tents if they're interested in responding to a point. But I just, one thing, Malik, or does that, maybe it doesn't stand.
Yeah,
okay, I'll just take note.
Yeah, they used to in the olden days
They
before
used to
you had
stand, right.
plastic, yeah.
So Malik said something very interesting. He said, on one hand, one factor shouldn't be dispositive, but on the other hand, there's a need for clarity. But aren't those two things at odds? So, so it would be much clearer if we said X percentage of kids are on your site, therefore you're kid-directed. So I just want to see if anybody would want to respond to that, but I saw that Josh and Donna had put up, and then James. If it is unclear if an app or product is child-directed, what would be the harm of erring on the side of being directed to children and therefore covered by COPPA?
Yeah, I can jump in on that one, and I think it connects to something that Josh was saying as well. So we really believe that when you have an adult who is watching children's content and reasonable measures are taken to really identify that as, an adult, that adult should be able to watch that content in a way that the adult is used to watching other content. And the reason I think that this is important is because there are many, many use cases. That this is not a small thing, but many use cases where adults legitimately watch content which might be deemed child-directed. So, for example, on YouTube, we have a category that is sort of falls into family vlogs and parent vlogs, and any given creator might in that category one day within a video talk about Halloween costumes and what's the family going to be doing in Halloween, and then in the next video or the same video talk about the top 10 tips for a safe Halloween, which may not be interesting to the kid, but will be interesting to the parents. And then clicking into that, the engagement that you lose when you move to a child-directed setting, like comments, and that sort of feedback loop goes away. And in the example that I'm sharing, parents are commenting to the video, to the creator, and there's a real back and forth feedback loop that is really central to digital and how so many of the platform operates today, especially YouTube.
Okay, and I think Don and then Josh.
To go to the question of what do you lose if you just immediately treat everything as though it's child-directed, you lose the ability to keep track of certain things and certain behaviors that, if directed towards a child, are particularly dangerous to the child on the part of the people who are engaging in the communications technologies.
And I'd like to add, if I can, the other thing that you lose is the ability for creators to engage with their audiences and with parents and people who really get into sort of a two-way street of feedback. YouTube is more than just a video platform. It's truly an engagement platform. And we see, all the time when adults are treated as adults and not as kids, when, we're able to reasonably identify that they're adults, that there are a lot of really, really valid and critical use cases. We have creators, family vloggers who have children with special needs, and they are communicating with an audience of families of parents who have similar joys and challenges and issues in their families. And when you look at the comments and that engagement on parent to parent, you really, really see how important that engagement is. Science education creators, where a homeschooling parent may ask that science educator to do an experiment the next time in the video, and that two-way street leads to a next video that is really great, not only for that family, but for the entire community. So we're worried that when you treat adults as children, then you lose all of that, and that's just something that's so essential to the creator community and the impact that they're having on their audiences.
Okay, so I want.
If I can jump in, I would also, I think a lot of the points being brought up are really reasonable points, and I go back to the balance of the factors between content and context. And if you solely focus on audience, you kind of get into the sports use case again, where if there's a popular site, a popular match, popular game that's popular for everyone, or music videos that have large audiences, they're going to have a large kids audience as well, and that needs to be taken into consideration, but so too do the other factors of context and content. So I agree that these are reasonable points, and audience is important, but I also agree that you've got to have a true balance across the spectrum.
So Josh and Jim.
For years, YouTube claimed in its terms of service, as we all know, that it was for 13 and up, even though it was an open secret that there were tons of children on YouTube, and that this was a place that advertisers went to reach children. On September 4th, you guys announced your settlement with YouTube. Now, there's another, there's a site called, a game called Fortnite that people may have heard of in this room, which try and find a 9-year-old who doesn't play Fortnite. Try and find a 10-year-old who doesn't play Fortnite. It's really, really hard. For 2 years, Fortnite said in their terms of service that they were for 13 and up because they didn't want to comply with COPPA and they didn't want to deal with all that stuff. On September 10th, 6 days after you announced the enforcement action, the settlement with YouTube, Fortnite changed its terms of service and now acknowledges that there are children on its site, now has a children's privacy policy. So enforcement actions go a tremendous way towards changing what companies actually know about children when they have a motivation to know what's going on.
So if I can jump in, there's a few things there that Josh brings up. One, I'll say that 5 years ago we built the YouTube Kids app, specifically to be the place for kids under 13 to go. And we did recently, or earlier last month, announce the product changes that we did to really treat kids viewing child-directed content, kids who might be unsupervised watching child-directed content on YouTube in a different way and an appropriate and right way. But I'll also add to your question on knowledge. We think that there's a big difference between actual knowledge and constructive knowledge, and we think that the actual knowledge standpoint and approach really is the right approach. There have been some who've said, well, Google and YouTube has really good machine learning. Can't you use that to identify accounts? And that's something that is flawed for a few reasons. One, machine learning classifiers. It's not a perfect science. Two, it's also not used by everyone. I think that the bar would be set in a way that not all companies would be able to use that. And those are some of the reasons why we'd be concerned around kind of clicking in deeper with sort of actual knowledge or creating constructive knowledge. Last thing I'll say is that we generate actual knowledge all the time through the ordinary course of our business. And one thing that I'm not sure if this is a known, we haven't talked about it much, but every single week on YouTube alone, we terminate thousands of accounts on the platform that we get actual knowledge on where there might be a child who's under 13, and we think that that's the right approach.
Okay, Peder?
Thanks. I want to continue a little bit on Malik was talking about on the actual knowledge. And I mean, we did hear in the first panel, I think Laura Moy raised a concern about, and I'm talking about platforms that have user-generated content. They would be on the hook if they have actual knowledge that they're collecting information from the users of that child-directed content. And if there's a concern that the platform is going to bury its head in the sand to avoid getting actual notice, should we just be talking about a constructive notice standard?
I think that there are reasonable points being brought up, and there are reasonable signals to be looking at on how to inform actual knowledge. But the sense and the feeling that I have that we have is that that constructive knowledge in sort of the way that you described is a bridge too far that really could cross the line even on privacy, and there are concerns around what might you have to do to create that constructive knowledge. The actual knowledge that we do generate through the ordinary course of our business is significant and meaningful. And as I mentioned earlier, every week we're terminating on just YouTube. It's bigger when you look at the broader company, but terminating thousands of accounts every week on the platform based on that actual knowledge. But this is one of the reasons why this forum is so useful, and we're so encouraged by it, because I do think that there are reasonable ideas, thoughts, and signals and points that we should consider as an industry.
I think, is there any context in which a platform could assume that the user of the child-directed content is actually an adult?
I think there are a lot of scenarios where the user, viewer of a child-directed content is an adult, which is one of the key reasons why we think it's so important to be able to treat adults when they're watching children's content, and reasonable measures are being taken to identify that as an adult. I'll share a personal example that comes to mind. A couple of years ago, I very randomly had the opportunity to interview the Reverend Jesse Jackson about his life and different things. And one thing that I did in that interview was I actually went onto YouTube and found a 40-year-old clip of him on Sesame Street doing the "I am somebody" speech to a beautiful group of diverse kids and young Jesse Jackson. It was an incredible clip. I showed him. He was speechless. For a man who has so many words, he was speechless when he saw it because it was the first time he'd seen it since he did it. And I think about, well, what if I was not able to comment to the other people who are interested in this clip and communicating about the history and the context of it, or even flash forward to now, Bruno Mars, let's say on Sesame Street. I like Bruno Mars, I'm an adult, and I'd like to be treated as one so I can comment with others. So I think that the notion of treating an adult as an adult, when we take the measures to identify that person as an adult, is really important, and there are a lot of use cases that I would say I would actually describe the YouTube experience as broken when you don't have that. It's not a nice to have layer. It's something that is central. I kind of think of color TV. If all of a sudden it became black and white, you would consider that television broken. And that's what YouTube is without that engagement for and with adults, with parents, and the like.
Malik, how many of your users are registered users who have been age-gated versus just people who are viewing YouTube without a registration account?
Good question. Don't have the answer to that. But I think where you may be going on that is that there have been questions that we'll probably talk about on the panel. Should a platform like a YouTube age-gate everyone? Is there some form of screen that we put up for all users? And the challenge there, and I think it's a very reasonable discussion and question to have, but I think that the challenge there is that YouTube also needs to be used signed out, logged out. There are so many use cases of YouTube where you might be someone who wants to view content for whatever private personal reasons as an anonymous user without having your login credentials and information logged in. So it's a good point, but that's why we think that the logged out scenario is so crucial.
James?
Yeah, so
But I think in the platform context, and Malik, I liked your example of the Sesame Street episode, but I mean, I think it's fundamental to COPPA that we look at the nature of the content, and if it is child-directed, we have a default, we assume it's a child visiting there. So I guess my question was, are there any layers you can build in that would allow you to overcome that presumption? But even with your example, I don't know how you shouldn't have treated you arriving on the Sesame Street video as a child.
Well, I think in that scenario, the problem with treating me like a child is that I wouldn't be able to engage as an adult. And maybe another scenario is the science creator on YouTube, the science educational creator who is making great how-to and physics content for an audience. Imagine a classroom that goes beyond the borders of their wall. And there are a lot of scenarios where a homeschooling parent asks that specific creator to do something next, and the engagement with that adult, with that parent, actually has a positive impact on what the next video that created is going to be. And oftentimes, you'll find in the comments section on family vlogs that there's a community. It's not just creator to the viewer. It's viewers. It's human beings who are connecting with each other on the topic of the video or the channel. If it's a creator, a family creator who shares that they've gone to marriage counseling, for example, and then you look into these are real examples, you look at the comments, there's a back and forth on parents on this content that in some scenarios may be deemed child-directed, but with adults who are treated as adults specifically, you see it really be a valuable component to the experience. More than valuable, just central.
Did anyone else want to weigh in?
So having an understanding of what industry knows about how often adults are viewing this child-directed content and what technological solutions they would propose for carve-outs for those adults. But child-directed content is the heart of COPPA. I mean, we spent a lot of time talking about the general audience and the mixed audience, but the child-directed, that's what COPPA is about. And so it seems to me very dangerous to start talking about carve-outs for adults viewing child-directed content without having much more knowledge about what those look like and how often they look like, and how we can be sure that on repeat visits it is that same adult, and now that the device hasn't been handed to a child.
If I can jump in, yeah, I think there's some good points there. There are a lot of I know creators who are watching this stream right now. Some in the audience here who are happy that this process is underway, because I think one of the big values of this process, Josh, to your point, is there's a need to get more intel information and feedback, and I encourage the FTC to really open up the tent to be inclusive of creator voices who have some of the anecdotes I've shared, but even more, and can really share how central, how critical this is. I'll share one more anecdote, a personal one that I did. I tried to be a creator off and on, but about a year ago I on a board of a nonprofit, LA Makerspace 2-Bit Circus Foundation, and we do STEAM education in libraries and schools. I created a video to try and help to teach kids how machine learning works, and to try and teach caregivers and librarians how to teach that, and created a fun video that has, candidly, two audiences. One is, hey, future, people of the world, here's something that you should care about, and here's, a very simple way to think about it and learn it. But the ultimate audience was actually teachers in the classroom, caregivers, parents, librarians, to take this project and then actually unpack it in a more robust way for kids, all in one video. The adults who watch that should be able to ask me questions about, well, when we're doing this project and we have a question, what's the answer? And the kids who watch it should be treated as a kid. And the anecdotes go further than just a few examples. It's really a robust, very central experience on platforms like YouTube.
Sure.
A lot of companies have products where, like, this is our main audience, but we anticipate that we may get a large number of children. If you anticipate that, my advice to you is that you create a mixed audience environment so that you can create a safer environment, and that you don't have to go through the process of doing VPC, but you're allowing all of your users in to engage in your product.
The only thing I would add to this topic is that on the topic of mixed audience, we believe that the spirit of that exception is right, but we would also encourage the FTC to consider expanding it as well to child-directed, in that treating adults as adults when they are watching kids' content and there's reasonable measures that are being taken to really identify that as an adult would be a good expansion and a good way forward.
Okay, well, we've got just a little bit of time left, and since this is a rule review process and we're sort of looking at where COPPA is now and maybe where it should go, I'd like to give each of the panelists a shot at a final word, and if you could, very quickly, if this is possible, describe what you think is the most powerful impact of COPPA over the past almost 2 decades, and what, if anything, you would change about COPPA.
Because we all have the same thing at stake. We care about kids. And so I think that that would help.
Great. Lightning round, Malik.
All right, lightning round.
Sorry.
So, you know, I think that the past 19 years, I think that COPPA really added, you know, so much to the mix on meaningful protection for kids, putting parents in really more of a driver's seat where they belong, and the rule has evolved over time. In terms of areas of improvement, I think it needs to continue to evolve to reflect some of the realities of today's world and topics that I've hit on, like treating adults as adults when they're on kids' content and really engaging with their audiences. The other thing I'll say, because I think that there's a topic that we didn't click into too much, is really thinking through as you move forward in the rulemaking on the immense value of content creators and developers. You know, what this next generation of creators are doing who are empowered by platforms like YouTube that have really given small businesses large voices and an ability to really change people's lives for positivity is really extraordinary. And I encourage the FTC to click into that more and see what's at stake with some of the decisions it makes around rules, because I think harm can be done to the very constituent, the very group that we all care about on this panel when that's put at risk.
James?
So when we look at COPPA,